discussing yesterday the union of the Spheros, which are essentially divine energy from God's infinity that gets manifested in particular channels. Remember the Ramak's mashal, that it's like clear water going into different colored glasses. So it is not a contradiction to the notion of unity, but rather it's simply a differential manifestation. And indeed, the Ramak has a long arichos, a whole chapter, not here, but in the Pardes Rimonim, regarding the significance of colors. Color actually is a very big thing. In Kabbalah, as I mentioned, the blue in Svat is Midas HaChesed, etc. Now, one final point. There's a lot to talk about Spheros, but again, in Torah Devorah itself, it is based on Spheros, but he doesn't go into all of the detail that he goes into in the Pardes Rimonim. But one final point about the Spheros generally, and that is the Spheros are merumas in the Shem Havaya, Yud Kei Vav Kei. And the way it works is the first Yud of God's name, the Kutzo Shel Yud, the little point of the Yud, is Keser. That's the original origin of all spiritual blessing. The Yud itself is Chochmah. The first Hey is Bina. So Chochmah Bina. Vav represents the 6 Spheros of Chesed, Gevurah, Tiferes, Netzach, Hod, Yesod. And the last Hey is Malchus. Okay, so Yud, Kei, Vav, Kei. The Yud is, the Kutzo Shel Yud is Keser. The Yud is Chachma. The Hey is Bina. The Vav are the 6. And the 7th is Malchus. Now you may ask, why do we separate? I mentioned the other day that we separate the first 3 from the last 7. But why do you make a differentiation between the last 6 and the 7th one? Why is Malchus separated? So again, he'll touch upon this a little bit. The idea actually is that the 6 Spheros are called a masculine element. And the 7th, Malchus, is the feminine element. That's Makabel. Malchus is Makabel from all the other Spheros. And therefore, it is the union of the 6 with Malchus that produces the bracha in the world. So let me give you a little example of this. You might actually say this without necessarily knowing. Before certain mitzvahs, there is a paragraph that's called L'Shem Yichud Kudsha Berichu Ushechintei. In the name of the unification of HaKadosh Baruch Hu and His Shekhinah. L'Shem Yichud. Some people say it before Tefillin. Some people say it before the counting of the Omer. Some people say it before Lulav and Esrog. In other words, now the Shem Yichud is a formula that was essentially invented by the Talmidim of the Ari, L'Shem Yichud. It has Kabbalistic meanings. There is a tshuva from the Neidah Yehuda, the great Neidah Yehuda, who actually paskins that unless you're a great Makubal, you're not allowed to say the L'Shem Yichud, because it connotes certain ideas that are beyond our comprehension, that we don't fully understand, that Chas v'Shalom could lead a person to kfira. So he was very, very, very much against the Amira of L'Shem Yichud. There's even a story that we don't know if it's true. The Neidah Yehuda actually had a meeting with the Baal Shem Tov in which they talked about this, and the Neidah Yehuda refused to concede on this issue bichlal. Other people say, like many things of Kabbalah, even if I don't understand what's going on, I can still invoke these powerful ideas. So I'm not here to paskin whatever your minhag is, you keep your minhag. But I just want to explain a term, if you call it explain. The yichud, the unification of Kudsha Berichu and his Shekhinah. Malchus, the last sphere of Malchus, is called feminine, and it's also called Shekhinah, which in fact is a feminine term, God's presence on earth. The 6 Spheros of Chesed, Gevurah, Tiferes, which are the different midos of Hashem that flow into Malchus, are called Kudsha Berichu. So Yichud Kudsha Berichu Ushechintei is the unification of the 6 male Spheros with the feminine aspect of Shekhinah. And when that union takes place, there is bracha that flows into the world. This is the meaning of yichudim, unifications, kudsha brecha shechinte. Now, once again, you understand why these are dangerous ideas. It goes back to the, what do you mean yichud? There's only one God. There's only one God. What is being united here? Unification implies things that are separated, that come together. Okay, real problem. So once again, the Megubalim say it's a metaphor, so to speak. It's a mashal for things we don't really understand. But I just want to point out that that's why in the Shem Havaya, the 6 Spheros that are called the masculine element of creation are in the Vav, and the last one is Malchus, or Shekhinah. Now, what's interesting is that the Zohar says, and the Talmud Devorah will talk about this a little bit, but I just want to throw out the thought so you can marinate it in your head for a while. He says, when a person does an Aveira, what is dislocated in particular are the Heys in Hashem's name. The Hey, Bina and Malchus get dislocated. And what Chuvah really means is, Tashuv Hey, you restore the Hey. Restoring the Hey is you repair the cosmic damage. And the reason why there are 2 Heys is because there are 2 Chuvahs. There is lower Chuvah and there is higher Chuvah. Lower Chuvah restores the second Hey of Malchus, and higher Chuvah restores the first Hey of Bina, which is at a higher Shirish. So the third part of the Tanya, the Alter Rebbe's Tanya, which is called Igeres HaTshuva, is essentially a hezber of what do we mean by lower tshuva and what do we mean by higher tshuva, and the Toshuv Hey, how one tshuva returns the Hey of Bina to the Shem HaMeforish, and the other returns the lower tshuva returns the Hey of the Shechina, the Hey of Malchus, to the Shem HaMeforish. Again, to give you a trivial example, they say, and again I don't know if it's true, that Eskimos have 300 terms for different colors of white, because the idea is they have to know exactly what snow is ice, when it's not ice, how fragile is it, because they have to walk around in environments that are dangerous. So the more sensitive you are to an idea, the more nuances you see, the more words you have, the more varieties you have. So an Eskimo might see 300 shades of white, when we just see, 3 or 4 shades of white, because we don't need to know. In Eretz Yisrael, you have 500 shades of religion, while in America you might only have 3 of them. Right? In America you have, more than 3, but in America you have, let's say, conservative, Reform Orthodox, and then Orthodox is modern Orthodox, Yeshiva, Hasidim. Okay? So you have a total of 6 combinations, more or less. In Eretz Yisrael, you multiply it by maybe a few hundred different types. For example, how many people could clearly tell you the difference between Rav Chaim Kanevsky and Rav Shmuel Auerbach? They're kind of, you'd think they're kind of the same. And yet, without getting into politics, and both of them are Zichronim Livracha, people would look at them as if these are 2 different religions. Right? Shmuel Auerbach and Rav Chaim Kanevsky, 2 different religions. Wow. Because as you get more attuned to something, you see more subtleties, you see more distinctions. So in Kabbalah, there is like a hyper understanding of different types of divine flows. What type of divine flow is coming from Malchus? And what type of divine flow is coming from Bina? Now to us, we just say, Hashem interacts with the world, and Hashem brings either Rachamim or Din. We kind of have chocolate vanilla flavor. Rachamim, Din, combination, pistachio, whatever it is. But for the Mekubalim, every single nuance is a different type of thing. And we don't really have the understanding or even the vocabulary to kind of articulate the difference between being Mesakein, the Hey of Bina, through Tshuva Ila'a, upper Tshuva, and being Mesakein, the Hey of Malchus or Shechina, which is Tshuva Tata, which is the lower Tshuva. So we say the words, so at least you get a sense of something, but we don't really, I include myself, we don't really understand what's going on. But I did want to just show you the connection between the Shem Havaya, the 10 Spheros, and the Koach of Chuvah, vis-a-vis Toshuv Hay, return the hays to their proper place. What gets, well, okay, the question is, I don't know if I should talk about Spheros beyond what the Talmud Devorah talks about here. Okay, maybe we'll leave it for later. Okay, all right, so now the first 2 chapters. So again, the thesis of Rav Moshe Cordovero is that we elicit the divine energies by engaging in behavior that parallels what those divine energies are, right? So we mimic, we imitate Hashem's particular midah, and that brings the midah into the world. So therefore, we have to identify what are Hashem's midas, and therefore how do we bring that into the world. So the whole Sefer, once again, as I said yesterday, is about imitating the Spheros, or to be more accurate, Hashem's manifestation in the Spheros. And the highest Sphera is the Sphera of Keser, and he's going in that order. How do you emulate what is called Keser, the highest of the high? So here, Rav Moshe Cordovero brings in what for many people, they often think this is the whole Talmud Devorah, and it is the largest part of it, that you imitate the Sphera of Keser by emulating the 13 midas of Rachamim as explained in a pasuk in Micha. Okay, so there are 13 ways that you trigger the hashpa'ah of Keser. Later he'll talk about the other spheres, but this is indeed the largest part of the book. As I said yesterday and before that, the 13 midas of Micha do parallel the 13 midas of the Torah, but the Zohar says the Micha is the root of those midas. The Torah is dealing with the lower level as they will be applied on earth, but the Sheresh, the roots of the Yud Gimel Midas of Rachamim of Moshe, are the Yud Gimel Midas that Micha articulated through Nevuah, that we recite at Tashlich, and that we also recite in the Haftarah of Shabbos Shuvah. Mikel Kamocha is in the Haftarah of Shabbos Shuvah. Okay, so let's try to do 1 or 2 today. So there are going to be 13 of them, and they correspond with the Yud Gimel Midas of Rachamim. The first is Mikel Kamocha. Who is a God like you, Hashem? Mikel Kamocha. And this corresponds with the first of the Yud Gimel Midas of Moshe, which according to the Mekubalim starts from Kel. Because Hashem are not min aminyan. So Hashem, Kel, Mikel Kamocha. That's a pretty good correspondence. So here, the Ramak says the following. What does Micha mean when he says, who is like you, God? So the Ramak develops a very simple idea that we know that HaKadosh Baruch Hu's relationship to the world is not the same as an artisan to his creation. If I'm a carpenter and I build a table, or I'm an architect and I build a building, yeah, without me, this building wouldn't exist. Without me, this table wouldn't exist. I am the creator of this table. But once I create it, its existence does not depend on me. So even if the architect dies, or the builder dies, or the carpenter dies, right? Michelangelo's work is still around, even if Michelangelo is not around. Meaning, in human creation, once I create, this thing has an existence independent of me. Yeah, I could break it, I could destroy it, but it doesn't need me to constantly infuse it with an energy that keeps it going. The world is not that way. When I say the world, I mean the universe is not that way. It's not simply the pshat that Hashem created the universe and then it kind of goes by itself. And it's not even the pshat that God created the universe and he has the power to intervene and destroy it. But that still would mean it goes by itself until God intervenes. Rather, the other way around, creation is not something that happened, Creation is something that is happening every single second, or whatever unit of time you use. HaKadosh Baruch Hu, we are alive now not because we were alive and God decided not to kill us. We are alive now only because it is the Ratzon Hashem giving us life this very minute. Okay, this is called continuous creation, and we say it in davening every day. Hamachadesh in Birchas Kriyashma. Hamachadesh betuvo b'chol yom tamid maseh bereishis. God recreates every day. It's not dafka every day, but every day the acts of creation. Ka'amor, as it says in the pasuk in Tehillim, li'oseh orim gedolim. He makes the great lights, not osah orim gedolim, oseh orim gedolim. The notion of continuous creation. I am alive only because Hashem is willing at this minute for me to be alive. He is giving me life. So now, let's contemplate a person who does Averos. A person is desecrating Shabbos. A person is eating treif. A person is bayal and erva. A person is speaking lashon hara. It's not simply the patience of God. Oh, Baruch Hashem, Hashem is so patient that He's not punishing the sinner. It's much more than that. The very moment that a person is spitting in HaKadosh Baruch Hu's face, Kaviyachal, Hashem is not simply refraining from punishing the person. Hashem is giving that person life and ability. I'm giving you the ability to hate me. I'm giving you the ability to rebel against me. I'm giving you life at the time of the Aveira itself. This is quite remarkable. This is very different than just being patient. A human being, could be patient, and that's hard too. Somebody's insulting me. Somebody is hurting me. I hold my peace. I hold myself back. That's a madrega. That's a very high madrega, as a matter of fact. But what that means, I'm holding myself back. Hashem is not holding himself back. Hashem is giving kindness at the very moment of the rebellion. That's the meaning, Rav Moshe Devorah says, of Mikael Kamocha. There is nothing like that. So, this is already the first of the 13. We have 12 more to go. Let's go up in levels. But the first one basically is the notion that even when someone is actively hurting you, psychologically, physically, different ways, you don't simply hold your peace and don't respond in kind. Although that's a madrega. Again, that is a madrega. But you continue to actually show them love, to be native to them, even in the middle of their doing things that are so painful and hurtful. And in that way you are emulating the midah of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And because you're emulating Hashem's midah, He will bring into the world that type of unconditional mercy as well, right? So that's the first idea of Mikael Kamocha, and that is, this is good. You understand? This is going beyond patience. Don't simply be on the madrega of I don't fight back. That's that's a high madrega. I don't mean to disparage that either, but rather actively be native, even to the one that is showing you hate and disdain and insult. Now again, I mean, you have to clarify this. We're not dealing right now with turning the other cheek, meaning to say if somebody is aggressively endangering you, there are halachas of rodef. I mean, habala harkacha, somebody wants to kill you, hashkim bahara blow, kill them first. We're not talking about, taking, threats to your life and the like. Primarily, the Ramak is talking about what you might call psychological pain. Someone is hurting me, right? So it's a human nature that when we're hurt, either we lash out, the lower madrega is to lash out, or we just want to distance ourselves from the situation. And sometimes we have to do that. We're not always on the madrega. But the Ramak is suggesting there's a certain madrega in which you continue to show the person love, even when in the process of them hurting you, just as Hashem continues to give life to the person in the very process of rebelling against Hashem. Yes.
Is there much suggesting that other emotions coincide with this like giving back? Is it like you can still have anger towards the person or have potentially other things, but you still act in this certain way?
Well, it's really both ways. In other words, we start off with act a certain way, even though you have different emotions, and then what happens is the emotions get educated by the actions. That's a very important klal. The Sefer HaChinuch says a number of times, Adam nifal kafi pulosav, a person's emotions are affected by the actions that they're doing. But eventually, though, the level you want to reach is your very emotions are changed. In other words, you look at people with rachmim, but I think maybe that'll come a little later, meaning as we go through the levels, he will eventually be talking about changing your feeling and changing your orientation. I think the first step is focusing on the actions. Behave in a loving way, even though you're hurt, even though things are difficult. In fact, this is a common example or common advice that's given in marriage counseling, where a person feels hurt or a person does not feel loved, and sometimes the idea is make believe, act as if you love, and then eventually the feeling actually comes. Instead of looking at my actions as a consequence of my emotion, as I feel, therefore I act, you can look at things in another way. I act, and therefore I will feel. Meaning to say, I do the action, and that educates my emotions. Emotions can be educated. Feelings can be trained. They can be redirected. You can learn to view things differently. As opposed to waiting until my feelings change to change my actions, you can start with your actions. It kind of reminds me, again, of a famous story of Rav Nachman of Breslov. You know, one of the ways he would teach is by stories. So in addition to Likutei Maran, which are his teachings, there are Maisius, Sipurei Maisius. In fact, in Breslov, there's a big inyan of telling stories, and there are maforshim on the stories, and everything else. So one of his famous stories is the prince who thought he was a chicken or thought he was a turkey. I'm sure you've heard the story. So he was a prince, and he thought he was a chicken. People tell turkey, but I don't think turkeys were in Europe at that time, so I think chicken is probably the more correct Gersa. He took off his clothes and he crawled under the table and he was eating stuff on the floor. And nobody could convince him that he was a human being. He was absolutely convinced he was a chicken. So a chacham shows up and says, I will cure the prince. So the first thing he did was he took off his clothes. He started crawling under the table with the prince. And the prince asked him, apparently the prince was still talking. He says, what are you doing under the table? He says, I'm a chicken too. You think you're the only one that's a chicken? So they're clucking together and they're eating scraps. And after a few weeks, the prince puts on a pair of pants and a shirt. So the prince says to him, what are you doing? He says, who says chickens can't wear pants? He says, okay. So the prince puts on pants as well, because it's not a contradiction to his identity. And then a few weeks after that, the person stands up and sits at the table. And the prince says, what are you doing? He says, who says chickens can't sit at a table? So the upshot was, after like a year, the prince was doing everything he did before he got sick. He was sitting at the table, he was talking to people, he was walking outside, he was dressed properly. Now, was he cured? So it depends how you define cure. He still thought he was a chicken. So I guess a psychotherapist would say he's still neurotic or whatever it is. But it didn't make a difference, because he was doing everything a human being did. So who cares if you think you're a chicken or not, if it makes no difference? I mean, you're going to your sedarim, right? You're going to davening. Okay. Now, Rav Nachman never tells you the meaning of the story. that's the thing. He tells you stories. And he used to say that why does he like to teach by story? Because stories is a no-loss proposition. Because if you get the Torah message, you learn something deep. And if you didn't get the Torah message, you heard a good story. As opposed to a Dvar Torah, if you get it, you got something. If you don't get it, you got nothing. With the story, you always get something, because even if you don't get the message, you got the story. So it's kedai for that itself. So Rav Nachman never tells you the meaning of the story, and people debate, what's the pshat of the story, what's the message of the story. There are whole svarim in Breslov to be mafaresh the story. But the simple pshat of the story is Rav Nachman is saying that very often when we're confronted with the need to change ourselves, we have a certain view of ourselves, like I'm a turkey, I'm a chicken, meaning I'm not a person who can, whatever it is, learn for 4 hours for a Seder. I'm not a person that can say Shalom Aleichem to a stranger. That's just not me, meaning my mental image is preventing me from making constructive changes, because I have a certain view of myself that this doesn't fit. Now, how did I get that view? I might have gotten it from my parents. I might have gotten it from negative experiences in school, from just experiences in life. But we do have, all of us have this video that we play in our lives about the type of person we are. And sometimes that inhibits us and that stops us. In other words, I'm a turkey, right? Actually, turkey fits the modern use of turkey. I'm a nothing. So the lesson of the story is, instead of working on changing your self-image, that might be extremely hard, kind of ignore it. Okay, I'm a turkey. That doesn't mean I can't go to davening. That doesn't mean I can't learn. That doesn't mean I can't give strangers shalom aleichem. Okay, I'm a turkey. But at some point, it doesn't make a difference, because the turkey who behaves like a human being has become a human being. So I think the bottom line of the lesson is, don't work directly on your emotions. Work on your actions. And at some point, your actions are going to change your self-perception of reality. You will become the human that you wanted to be, that you should be, that you really are, by simply doing the right thing. So, in the specific context of Bein Adam L'Chaveiro, the Ramak, this is kind of a very long-winded answer to your question, the Ramak is giving us the same bit of advice here. And that is, give, open yourself, show love, even if you don't feel it, and even if you feel the person doesn't deserve it, and the person is in the middle of hurting you. Try to give him life just as God gives you life in the very moment that you're rebelling against him. And it's not just Hashem is patient and not punishing me, which would be good enough, but he's actually giving me life based on continuous creation. Right, so that's the great midah of mi kale kamocha. Okay, that's the first midah, that this is beyond what a human being normally does. This is really divine. What did Shakespeare say? What is it? To forgive divine. What's the first part of that? I don't remember it. To err is human. Right. To err is human. To forgive divine. But this is beyond forgiveness. This is, because I could forgive and just never see the guy again, right? That's one type of, I'm mochel you, just don't talk to me again. That's a common, whether we say it or not, that's a common, I'm mochel, just get out of my life. This is a different madrega where you actually incorporate the person in your life and you give to him in spite of everything. It reminds me a little bit, this is something that really impressed me a lot. This was a Chabad story about a Chabad couple in Minnesota, in Nebraska. For some crazy reason, I don't know why, Nebraska was the national headquarters of the American Nazi Party. I don't know why Nebraska, but that happened to be where it was. And there was like a Nazi there, and he got into an accident, and he lost both of his legs. He was wheelchair bound. He was very, very depressed. And a Chabad couple in Omaha heard about him, and they came to visit him and bring him food and take him to the park and spend time with him, which is pretty odd. You're a religious couple, you befriend a Nazi. And he really didn't understand. He was obviously very suspicious. Oh, you're coming to kill me or something? Because I can't fight back now. But over time, They kept on showing him love. He was a Nazi. He hated Jews. He wanted Jews to die, And over time, he totally changed because he saw that they were showing him love in spite of who he was, in spite of everything that he represented. And in time, he became, he repudiated everything that he had lived for, and he became a lover of the Jewish people because he saw that he was totally wrong. So you see that this is how the enemy itself can become your friend, by showing that you care for them, no matter what. Okay, so that's the first midah of Mikel Kamocha, to actively give chesed at the very moment when people are hating you and showing you, spitting in your face, as when we sin, we spit in God's face. Okay, so we'll stop here. So that's the first midah, and then we'll move tomorrow to Nosei Avon. Now, as I mentioned, Nosei Avon structurally is a little anomalous, because Nosei Avon is the second of the Yud Gimel Midas. So based on the Ari's counting, Nosei Avon corresponds with Rachum, which is a little odd because the very word Nosei Avon appears in the Yud Gimel Midas of Moshe further down the list. So it is interesting that even when Micha uses the identical words that the Torah uses, it does not correspond to the same midah, because Micha is following the order of the midos of Moshe. So when you make the matchup, you got to match up the words with the midos of Moshe, which means Nosei Avon of Micha matches up with Rachum of the Yud Gimel Midos of Rachamim. Okay, I don't have a clear answer for that. It seems structurally a very odd way of synthesizing two lists. You'd figure, well, at least when you're using the same words, they ought to match. Okay, if you're not using the same words, that's one thing. When you're using the same words, one would have assumed there'd be a matchup, but just be aware that indeed they do not match up in that way. Okay, see you tomorrow.